I see a few more gray heads here. My first experience with the topic du jour was in 1938 when I was in Providence as the hurricane went through that town. What's interesting to look at what happened with the 1938 hurricane is essentially the forests of Connecticut as well as New England were fundamentally changed. There was so much lumber available for 2 years, it was harvested and the cost of construction went down about 50%. There was such a labor shortage that women, normally excluded from the workforce, particularly lumbering and construction, entered with glory and great record and essentially established women-owned practices before the Second World War. So there was both disaster and opportunity. The next date I would mention is 1970. I was the architect of the first solar home in Westbrook, Connecticut. And by the time that the OPEC oil embargo stacked cars up at each gas station, it was one of 4 solar homes in the US lived in by people. And it was the first one that was essentially private market. The other 3 were research projects. But looking from Rebecca's office building a month or so ago across Groton Harbor, one of the solar houses of that era, it was built in 1975, is still operating by the Eames family. And I had a chat with the Eames folks, and they assume that over that 40-year period, you could safely say they've saved $2,000 a year. More recently, it's even more. So that's roughly an $80,000 savings that was not spent on fuel. And the system to install in 1976 was $15,000. So essentially, from then I became a member of Governor Grasso's Solar Task Force, did many things with laws and ordinances. One of the interesting, effective programs that came from her initiatives was the Solar Grant Program, where $5,000 grants were made available to homeowners to install passive and active solar systems. And after about 4 or 5 years, I was the evaluator. I went around to 125 of the projects, wrote a report, and the results are what was published as the Connecticut Home Builders Consumer Guide. And that remained in publication and in print for 10 years. And if it were brought back today, there isn't much that you would change about it. In other words, the technology was known then, was applied then, and in the state of Connecticut was advanced by a very low. One of the advantages of that grant program, there were a few non-players, non-performers. But what was lost? $5,000. It didn't require a whole lot of bureaucracy to follow up and chase down and recriminate. Well, now, the most significant event to hit us in terms of disasters is Hurricane Sandy. Connecticut had the light touch compared to New York and New Jersey. If you look at all the statistics, financial loss, days of loss of occupancy, even deaths, they're 10 times more in New York and New Jersey than in Connecticut. So we had a PAT, which is a warning. And what's interesting is in my work in New Jersey, if we were to have a meeting like this, there would be 400 to 500 people present. We've had similar meetings in Connecticut. There are 20, 30 people, all committed, all in wanting to be involved. But essentially the rule is, how many times does one have to be hit over the head by a 2x4 before you pay attention? I think I have one key message that's already bubbling up from the discussion. When we leave the room today, to the extent that you have the time, if I get moving and we have a nice lunch, to form in each community a group. Task force is about as far as I want to define that. Name yet to be determined, but some of the terms being thrown about are Energy Task Force, Conservation Task Force, Resilience Task Force, all of those words are kind of, well, they're known to some and not known to others. So I leave it open how you'd fill in the blank. But there is 3 agendas to which it is addressed. One is health. The other is safety. What's missing? Prosperity. Economics. Okay? Now, if you Google the fancy words climate adaptation and climate mitigation, and then write in graphics or photo, on your screen will come about 30 graphics. Familiar to you by now because they're used in every report. There's a circle called climate adaptation, and it has a list of things that one is doing, and a lot of what your energy task force are doing are exactly that. Then there's the next circle, and it's either mitigation or some response to natural hazards, and you'll see there emergency preparedness, safety, those types of considerations, that circle. And then in between, you'll see the projects that actually satisfy both. You know what they are, you're involved with them. Green infrastructure, clean energy projects, no big deal. Retrofits, all stuff that's known. But in most of the promotion of these, which gets some people on board and some people running for the exits, the circle called economy is the one that actually unifies the entire community. So when we form our local task groups, named to be determined, all 3 of those need to be represented. And what I'm going to go through are 3 points that essentially give you the credentials to initiate that group in a meaningful dialogue, not only within your volunteer community, but in the legislative councils of each municipality. Every elected official, and I'm an appointed official, I'm a commissioner like many of you on essentially a voluntary, but for us we've made it an important conservation commission in the town of Trumbull. So at one point I raised my hand and pledged to protect the public health and safety. That actually gets back to what each of us is doing, which is as climate chaos and disruption falls upon us, everybody is confused, deer in headlight. A foundation statement that will distinguish us from many other regions of the world, already evident. We are a nation of laws. So what I would like to do is get a little bit into, but not take the entire time. What we're doing in this room actually is fulfilling, at some point, some enabling legislation. In the laws that govern planning, there's actually a set of laws written in 1920s that are the standards on which local municipal plans through the state are implemented. So that enabling legislation goes back to the 1920s. It was first put the poison stuff there, the dirty stuff here, the clean stuff there. It was that type of zoning. As you bring it forward, and all of this is in a handout, I'm not going to ask you to go through it now, but when you want the details, it's in this handout, because it's an interesting map. Because when we go to, oh, you want me to be here? When we go before legislative bodies, and that means we walk into the selectman's office, we have the legal basis to defend public health and safety and economy. And I don't know anybody who can deny that discussion, okay? That, in fact, is why we're here. What does that involve? Well, the second point, we are a nation of laws, but the conditions, the future conditions, the present and future conditions on which laws are based are changing. And the climate data is evidence of that moving target. So the second issue is, what do we do about moving targets? Every rain drain that's now calculated for every building is based on rain data that goes up to about 2005. So almost by definition, every gutter and downspout is undersized for the increasingly large downpours we can handle that. That's easy. Not too worried about that. However, sea level rise, and I will address the little question that came up about what does BFE or base flood elevation mean. Very important. But of particular interest to those who build buildings, I'm one of them, that should have a minimum life of 70 years. There's actually within the code, I, architect, mechanical engineer of this building, am required to provide a certain standard of air quality and temperature control based on energy data or climate data that goes up to 2005. As that data trends towards heat, the air conditioning systems are going to grind longer, maybe be undersized and fail to meet the standard. And what's of interest is, depending on where you are, there's opportunities. Well, we can use more passive heating is more effective for a longer period. So interesting that wherever we are located, climate change with respect to rain, is there more rain or less? Climate change with respect to heat, hotter, cooler, and then water, that which checks, this is a clean water discussion as well, that's changing. So those are sometimes considered the threats. How do we turn those to the opportunities? And the answer is by understanding. Water is a resource, food is a resource, trees are a resource, water shaded by trees is a double resource because the fish are happy therein. And in fact, to all of us who are gardeners, that nexus of water, temperature, food, we know that intimately in our fingernails. And I liked the comment this morning, I think Rebecca made, that actually our coast is a resource. Every situation, every context has a resource, opportunity, and a constraint. So it's that knowledge. In our local task force, we don't have the capacity for that knowledge. However, the fact that the state has appointed a science-based panel, I would say the number one charge for such a panel is actually to track the science. How many have read the 800-page NCA, National Climate Assessment? I hope no hands, but I have. So when actually that National Climate Assessment, published every 3 years, most recently updated last year, so it's called NCA 3, that has the climate data, science-based, over 1,000 citations, on which public legislative policy is based. How is it based? And this is in that little diagram I'm handing out. By an executive order of the president. It's not an act of Congress, but an executive order of the president. There's been a number of them, but stating that your town, your state, your municipality must file community comprehensive plans that account for, and then when they use the word climate change, 13 state governors wrote complaints about the word, so the wording was changed to, but it still stands as law. Remember, we're a nation of laws. Every community must have a plan that accounts for probable future changing conditions, including, comma, colon, quote, and there you'll see weather and climate, okay? So actually that's the frail wording that enables our presenting to a public legislative both policy and practice when we're arguing for ordinances, when we're arguing for planning and zoning. We actually have the basis of law such that any property owner, including a municipality, that does not meet a standard of diligence or standard of care, that's a phrase from medical terms, but now being applied to public community planning, failure to meet a standard of care is a basis of negligence and tort lawsuits. And we are seeing some, it's all being played out in the courts, of actions being taken by community stakeholders that their community did not adequately anticipate, fill in the blank, flooding, earthquake, whatever. So that's the moving target part. Now the third point that characterizes the work ahead, what is this like? Well, the image, remember the pickup sticks? So this game, we were engaged in pickup sticks. And I'm not sure whether it's the yellow, the red, the green, or the blue. And I want you to help me because we're playing this game together. And actually, the local discussion with every task group is, which stick can we move? And the answer is the one that's lying fairly free and independent. That's the low-hanging fruit that was mentioned this morning. There are many. Plant trees along rivers, shading, habitat, climate reduction, protection of the riverine against flooding. There's so many wins that it's actually, I saw that nice image of the grid city. I just want to add trees all over that. I did that. Okay. So that's the key. Now I have 4 publications that, and then I want to hear a little. I want to respond to the questions that came up, but will be of interest. And these are, I write books. Some of these are mine, some of them are not. And you can come up and look at these. At the Mercy of Nature is a book that I collaborated with, and it's a description of Shackleton's saga as he brought 24 survivors from a 2-year subarctic Antarctic rescue, okay? And after he did this, he was, of course, a world hero, eclipsed because World War I had set upon the world. So this, in its own history, was not well known. But he wrote the 4 principles by which he was able to survive extraordinary difficulty. And the one that I just remind us all, if he did not have optimism that he could survive, he says, it wouldn't have worked. So there was not a day that he didn't get up and plan forces, whether it was pitch black, Antarctic midnight, or full daylight, where he was pulling sailors out of the water because they had fallen in frozen water. So there was many little stories like that without the ability and the confidence of survival. So that's that principle, which actually, as our world gets shaken, will become more and more important. To answer anybody's claim that it's too expensive, a book by a homeowner who's a scientist called Trail Magic documents down to the dollar that he and his wife was able to build a net energy, an energy positive home. It has photoelectric cells, so it not only powers his car, his farm vehicles, but it also powers his farm where they have organic produce, which he then makes available to local restaurants. So this is in every case a net energy producer, food producer, and what needs to be known is it was done within the existing constraints of conventional construction cost. He goes into the detail there to argue that point. So don't let anyone say it ain't affordable. They are not correct on that. A third book, and this is one of the keys to what we're going to do as we set up our local task force. It's called Public Participation. FEMA calls it the whole community approach. Anybody involved with FEMA that knows that? So to get a FEMA grant, you, grant writer, have to document how in your community, in your state, you are involving the community of stakeholders, and FEMA actually gets down to the explicit design of that stakeholder community, stakeholder group. It has to be 50% public, 50% private, and the players who are sitting at the table have to represent all sectors. And one of the most important seats at the table is someone who understands community health and communities at risk and underrepresented communities. And those of you who have done disaster response know it ain't simple, and mainly you're dealing with a grieving community. The decisions made by New Orleans for about a year were under grief, and the decisions were not wise They made decisions to stay where they were, where they shouldn't have. And about a year later, after the groups started getting out of it, they said, can we go back? Can we change what we said? And FEMA learned they had actually had the opportunity to have grief counseling as part of the recovery, and it was redlined out, lack of budget. What FEMA learned made them come back with a new administration under Craig Fugate with a fury that says, no plans accepted unless you can show that you are representing the stakeholder group most impacted by your plans. And that's a key. And here's a text, it's about a week old, not mine, but it is the best text on the nitty-gritty. And Melissa and Patrice know this stuff in their fingernails, but if you're interested, this might be helpful to you. Come up and look at it. I find it very helpful, and I've been in this business for 50 years. This is a wonderful summary. So the final book, which is just to promote, I'll tell you a little bit what I do, but it's not to sell the book. This was published 2009, before Sandy. I wanted it called Design for Resilience. The author, the publisher won. It's called Design for Flooding. But it talks about the resource of water. And when we have it, how can we turn it from threat to opportunity? And back to Rebecca's point, Connecticut is blessed, and this actually should be part of the governor's one-liner, with water, with a fairly healthy, needs attention treescape. Could learn lessons from Maine to improve that. We have a history in farms, which is in the Second World War, we were a producing state, feeding the nation. So what are we going to boast for the next 50 years? And if we say we are rich in resources of water, energy, food, land, soil, and trees. Hydro. And hydro, yes, okay. Hydro. All right, important. It's wonderful discussion about elevation. So anyway, that's the short and sweet of it. That's the pitch. And I wanted to stop here and just respond to any and all questions, with one exception, that I'm going to start with the BFE, the base flood elevation question. How many of your communities are in the FEMA National Flood Insurance Program? Do you know? Okay, not many. So I know Westport is, I know the coastal communities are, and actually Westport is not only in the program, but you're in the community rating system, CRS program, okay? Now, I'm a member of the Conservation Commission of Trumbull, and we have formed within Bridgeport region a six-town council. So we have both our town council, Conservation Commission, and then we have a group of six under the regional plan authority, which is a government council. It sort of works. We've had some successes. We've had not all the successes we want. It's all the stuff you know about, and it's okay, it's a known beast. However, we have three sources of funds, and I'm wondering if you know about them. How many of your communities have a watershed management plan approved by Connecticut Deep? Okay? And the reason you do that is because you qualify for 319 grants, which are up to $125,000 to be matched, but nonetheless. So in our little regional group, the low-hanging fruit, the thing that meets those three circles, are watershed improvements. It improves water quality, it controls flooding, it adds to the beauty. Someone asked about what my town looks like. Beautiful projects on my website sell my town. So there's a win-win-win. 319 grants through DEEP, because my town has been responsible to the watershed protection in which we reside. I actually think that's pretty much all of, at least half of Connecticut falls under that category. The Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, every one of your communities that's in the FEMA program, and I would ask you to go check. Go to your town hall and say, who's in charge of flood in the town hall? I want to go talk to her or him. They have had to file every 4 years a natural hazard mitigation plan. FEMA has required and is upping the requirement to include all future probable conditions, including climate and weather. So that is already a requirement of every town that I know about. And by the way, as Rebecca also mentioned, the state requirements for Plan of Conservation and Development, POCD, now references that. So you aren't going to get approval of your comprehensive plan without referencing the natural hazard mitigation plan. And what's interesting about the natural hazard mitigation plan is, to do it responsibly, there's been a meeting in your community which the police, the fire, public works, all stakeholders, at least on the municipal side, have been represented. So actually somewhere in your community there's a list of threats, and it might have to do with the culvert is too small, the flood, the bridge is flooded, this zone, whatever it may be. Meriden, Connecticut has reduced its floodplain risk, this is an inland riverine community, by 30% projected by a plan that they have now installed. So when you look at that, they show the flood plan that's existing 10 years ago, and then the floodplain reduction as a result of a whole series of actions. And one of them is daylighting, where the river goes onto the road, constrained, goes fast to tunnels, just freeing it up actually lowers the flood risk. And they're making it part of the central town delightful park right in the center of town. So that's where beauty, economy, safety, and health are combined. Okay? Every community, you sell this at every community. So all we need to do is walk out of here and say, well, I myself can't do it, but it would be nice, as Melissa has suggested, that you do set up the networking of peer support so that you can do it with confidence. I'm involved with several national programs attempting to do this nationwide. One is called the Resilient Neighbors Network, RNN, and we just started last year, but there's 10 communities where essentially they're peer-to-peer saying, we did this, what did you guys do? We need help on that. That movement is going to go rapidly. Be a part of it, okay? So finally, to the question of BFE. So you've all seen cars in which a computer is calculating when you're going to run out of gas. Have you got one of those cars? The Prius, if you have a Prius, it does that. Well, it's just a computer calculation. And I have heard stories of people running out of gas before I was warned, okay? A FEMA map that shows a flood insurance rate. It's a line. It's probably it's this thick. And over this side of the line, I'm in a coastal A zone. And over this side of the line, I'm in an A zone. Okay. And over here, depending on what my town has told me, I have to elevate my house this high, and everything underneath has to be breakable walls, or breakaway walls. And over here, my neighbor, 4 feet away, just has to have a wall and can have holes in it. Okay. So that line means nothing except insurance rate. It's based on all historical data. What does 1% per year mean? Well, the science is great. It goes back, in some cases, 150 years of flooding in Connecticut. So they put all of that data into a computer, and if that's the data set, you know the law of probabilities, what's in the 1%? And that's 1% based on historical data. There's the line. What has happened since we took that historical data? Parking lots, development, erosion, subsidence, and sea level rise have all changed. FEMA announces in yellow stickies in their publication, do not use this line as the basis of planning in anticipation of protecting your community against flooding. I would gather that 99% of the community's public works officials doing all good work in reviewing plans do not know that fact, because the local ordinance says the insurance line is our design guideline. So that is why you'll see all sorts of moving target discussions about this line. I think Melissa was correct in answering you that if I'm an aggrieved property owner, I think that line's wrong, I have the right to have it reviewed. And in fact, some communities have saved a lot of money in doing the engineering based on local conditions. There's hydrologic models that are absolutely fantastic that would represent a more accurate science base for setting that so we can move. That line is movable. I hope that's helpful as a part answer, okay? Shut up. We're keeping you for lunch, but I would, before you take us to lunch, tell me a point that you would be happy for a little bit more clarification, and can we take a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to ask you who know the legislation, does anyone know what is the enabling legislation that empowers you to be in this room? Do you have a carrot only, or do you have a stick disguised as a carrot, or do you have a stick? You see the difference. A stick is, my town must meet this standard. A stick with a carrot is, my town must meet this standard. But look at all this nice gravy money that if you join now. And a carrot is simply, here's gravy money, incentive, and in which case some people will play and others will not. So does anyone know? You guys must know. What is the enable? It is a carrot in the state of Connecticut. So that legislation passed, I think it was under Governor Rell, requiring towns to do a climate action plan. There's no stick behind that? Don't know. Okay. This is a touchy point, but as soon as it becomes clear, and the White House is trying to make it clear, and what they've done with about 2 or 3 first presidential directives, executive orders, now every federal project that is touched by federal money must address climate change. So eventually this is going to hit the street. That we have to pay attention. And to what attention? What do we pay attention to? We're going to have to turn to the state science panel. Other states, Florida as an example, have been, their state science advisory, New York is well known on this case. They have the best scientists available, establishing that in the state of Florida, the risks are such, and they've applied this statewide. Every municipality must recognize a sea level rise. In the state of Florida, it's BFE plus 2 feet, okay? So towns, engineers, private citizens can't get involved with this. We have to turn to the state scientists. That'll be very important. And thank you for all the good work on the state legislative task force that set the ground work for this. And the good work is only going to continue. Any other questions? Is hunger getting it? Okay. Then bless you. Have a conversation on any point after this. And Melissa, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Don.